Welcome back, guys. Hello. Today we're going to get started on a new series where I'm going to be taking questions from the community and answering them to the best of my ability with whatever limited knowledge I have on computers and tech-related things. And these questions can be about anything from my opinions on a PC build you put together, a parts list, what you should look for in PC building, my thoughts on games, what games are worthwhile buying, what my thoughts on the tech sphere are, or any of that type of thing. Any questions that I can answer, you can leave them in, and I'll be reading through those and, responding to a good few of them. So here we go. I'm going to get started real quick with the first question from an old pal of mine who goes by the username X*Luke on YouTube. Cool guy. He's supported me for a very long time. So we're just going to get started here. His question is, as someone who knows basically nothing about computers, I'm curious what one should look for on a graphics card and or CPU, more specifically for video editing. Now, the interesting thing about this question is that generally I'm focused mostly on gaming computers whenever I'm talking about budgeting. And so generally what you're looking for with budgeting a gaming computer, this is kind of a rule of thumb I've picked up or thought of myself, and it's highly malleable. It's very much a rule of thumb, not something to necessarily focus on. But generally, kind of what I'm targeting is about half of the budget being oriented to the GPU. That's generally what I go for at first glance. Half of the budget going to GPU. About a sixth to a fourth of the rest of the budget, or of the total budget, going to the CPU, and then everything else going to everything else. Whatever you have left over going to everything else. That's generally what I've gone for, but that's been awfully malleable, especially at the lower end when you're actually, fighting a tougher budget and you're trying to hit a specific amount of, RAM and storage. That's going to end up taking more than the supposed, third to a quarter of the remaining of the total budget. It can sometimes do that. And so while it's a okay rule of thumb to use, it works some of the time, mostly with like mid-range builds. High-end builds, it also starts to fall apart a little bit, but generally it does pretty much work in mid-range, in like the mid-high end, but it's awfully malleable. The thing with that is that it's generally highly prioritizing the GPU, what you're spending on the GPU, with half of the budget generally in my brain going straight to the graphics card. But when we're talking video editing, while graphics cards are important, and they do certain things, they're generally there, from what I've seen and experienced, more to help out with some video effects and stuff like that. It does help generally with some speed and a lot of things, but most of the time it's going to be very CPU based. So as long as you're not totally skimping out on a GPU, you're hardly going to notice it. So honestly, something like a 3060 12 gig, or if you want to go recent, a 5070, although it's going to be a big price bump, you don't necessarily need to go all the way there. You could do a 9060 XT. If you're planning on doing like streaming and stuff like that at all, then you might want to stick with NVIDIA due to the encoder situation. But it's not totally unusable on the AMD side, but that is something to keep in mind. In that case, you might want to go for something like a 5060 Ti 16 gig. Generally, you want at least 8 gigs of RAM from what I was saying, but it never hurts to have more for stuff like this when it comes to VRAM amounts, because you never know how much is going to be eaten, especially if you have larger projects and things like that. That's just a few thoughts on, the overall of editing PCs. Now, what would you really want to do? First off, it depends on what you want, right? Budgeting in general always depends on what you want to get out of something. For editing PCs, you're definitely going to be prioritizing CPU performance. If you are okay spending, upwards of $1,500 on a PC, you might as well do something pretty darn solid. For editing PCs, you're probably going to want to do a CPU with a lot of cores, a lot of threads, something that can handle a ton of tasks simultaneously. And so you might end up edging towards the Intel side of the picture. and getting an Intel CPU. For gaming, they're definitely not the best. For productivity, they do pretty darn good, just due to simply the fact that they have a ton of cores. A ton of cores. Now, you're going to want to look up benchmarks on your own. I don't do a lot of benchmark research into rendering times and the like of that, because I'm generally more on the gaming side. So you're definitely going to want to look into your exact requirements and what actually ends up being the fastest for the budget you have. But generally, if you're looking for a decent system for pretty much anything, just a very decent system, especially for editing, probably between $1,250 and $1,500 is what you'd want to end up budgeting for. And then getting a nice CPU, a lot of good fast storage, making sure it's fast storage. This could be a very popular for at least gamers. I'm not sure if this necessarily applies to editing, because again, I'm not necessarily in the editing field. I would do some research on your own. But the Samsung 990 Pros, those can be very good for just flat out SSD speeds, but they might be overkill still. And then you just have to get something really, because if you're working with very large 4K project files that can go on for a long time and you want to keep those on your local PC for a long time, you're generally going to want to get a good amount of storage too. In my case, I have 3.5 terabytes. That is not the fastest storage in the world. I didn't really prioritize that when building my PC since it's oriented towards gaming. But as I'm moving into video editing, I'm starting to notice a little bit of issues coming from that. But it's still plenty fast for what I have. I'm not sure exactly what I have in my PC. Some somewhat cheap 2 terabyte, and then a 1 terabyte as well, and then a 512 SSD that I boot Windows from. So I got 3. But what I've noticed with that is that storage has already started to really pile up due to the file sizes of my projects, especially because of the way I have it done. I think a lot of the files end up being somewhat duplicated as the project files keep their own sets of things. I'm not sure if this is entirely accurate. I think it might not be. I think it is staking from itself, but whenever I render, whenever I do something like that, it does increase the storage, and it's like an infinite loop of more and more and more storage being used. And it's like, oh my gosh. So I'm going to need to either offload that onto a secondary system, some sort of storage solution, or upgrade my storage eventually. Not sure what I'm going to do yet. As it stands now, I'm kind of just teetering on the edge of just needing to figure something out and fast. Or just end up deleting old projects, which I might have to do. They're already up, and it's not like I'm going to change them anytime soon. That and RAM. Make sure you're getting a decent amount of RAM and at a pretty good speed. Probably DDR5 6000 is generally with a CL. I mean, I'm not sure if the cast latency is really going to matter too much for editing. It can somewhat matter-ish. The timings are minimally important in gaming. It might actually matter more in editing. That's something to look into on your end, probably. But really, as long as it's a decent speed, so DDR5 6000, you're going to be pretty much set. Intel might have a broader range of speeds you can choose from, but right now with DDR5 being super expensive, it's really going to come up to your own discretion. Again, budgeting for a very good CPU, a very good amount of storage at a good speed, and then at least 32 gigs of RAM, if not a little more. You could do 48, I believe, or you could do 64. 64 is a solid number that a lot of editing PCs that I've seen generally go for. So I would suggest that too. That would work. But yeah, you're definitely targeting that, and then whatever you have left over, get something effective for a GPU. Not necessarily insane, because that's not necessarily the focus. For a lot of gaming PCs, you're definitely trying to get a really good GPU generally, unless you're doing only esports titles. But in your case, the GPU is, definitely less important. Focus on some other things, and you'll be fine with like 3060, 12 gig, and up when it comes to power, just making sure you keep in mind VRAM counts. So yeah, what I'd recommend in the end then, I know a bit of a ramble there, but what I'd really recommend is you look into some of the things that you want, look into what the needs you have are, target a good CPU, good RAM, and good storage with a high amount of storage for both your RAM and storage, and the GPU, do what's necessary, and look into that for yourself. Make sure you're choosing something good. Yeah, and that's basically that question. So thank you for leaving that. Again, you've been a great help through this channel, sticking around, and it's kind of awesome. So yeah, hey, and shout out to his channel. Go ahead and check it out. He's going to be starting to upload a lot more. So I just want to say, check him out. I know I'm not very big either, but might as well help a brother out. All right, and for our next question, this one's very long, honestly, so let's take a look at it. I had my brother write up a little bit of a TLDR of it. I will, have the actual full post appear on screen about now, so you can read the whole thing if you want. But generally, he's asking, this is a guy who goes by the name of Alex Anson. Whoa. I'm so sorry for breaking this name, but Alex Sanson, YouTube 2623 YT. I'm so sorry for totally butchering your name. Thanks for commenting and leaving a thing here, but let's get into it. He's asking me what I think of his PC build. All right, and so this PC build is using an MSI X870 Gaming Plus Wi-Fi motherboard, and a lot of the replies are talking about his motherboard choice. I did take a little gander at the replies. I am actually not terribly into motherboard choices right now. I don't necessarily give much thought. As long as it does everything you need it to, then it will be fine. You generally don't need something insane for the motherboard. The motherboard just needs to be able to drive what you need it to drive, and right now that generally just means that you want your GPU to be at least PCIe 4 times 16, I believe, and to have enough storage slots that you are fine with. It is the right size for whatever case you choose and all of that. That's going to be like the real thing for me. Generally, I don't put terribly too much thought into the motherboard I'm getting, as long as it's not a motherboard that has terrible reviews or is generally considered to be a part of the dumpster bin of electronic devices. I generally am not too worried about what I receive. Although some things can be under consideration. If you care about RGB, sometimes RGB headers. But if you're doing, which you are, AM5, you're going to have ARGB headers, and that's not going to be a problem for you. But anyway, yeah, people were saying that the motherboard might be a little overkill. He said anything under $300, you will buy it for motherboard. Yeah, honestly, you can go pretty cheap for a motherboard. You don't need to go insane. Look at the reviews. Make sure you understand what you're getting and what you're getting out of it and what you are going to put into it. But honestly, motherboards are not the biggest deal. You know, you have people who spend like $600 on motherboards, and I just don't see the point. I just don't see it. Anyway, and 32 gigabytes of DDR5, 6400 megahertz CL32, or 6000 megahertz CL30. Yeah, it don't matter. Both great just right now. Prices are insane. Yeah, so yes, prices are absolutely insane. But what I do see later on, he does mention having 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 at CL36. So here's the thing. CL rate latency, right? I did switch from a set of DDR5 6000 CL36 to a set of CL30. Pretty much identical in every way, but it also had better timings in general. And here's the thing. I've noticed minimal, like no gains, pretty much. I just don't. I just don't really notice it. There's probably gains to be had, but generally it's not something to worry too much about. The reason I did it is because I did get that 9800 X3D, and I'm like, you know what? I don't necessarily want to pair the 9800 X3D with, less than RAM, you know what I mean? But at the same time, I haven't really noticed any real benefit from it. The RAM I was using was a tiny bit unstable with my motherboard though, so I definitely am happy with it. But don't worry. I really don't worry too much. Yeah, and that's what I would say about that too. It's not going to impact you very much, especially in esports titles. Generally, like you're going to be just fine. You're going to be just fine, absolutely fine. Okay. Now, reusing older SSDs, and you can always upgrade later. Yeah, do that. Yeah, my secondary PC is actually using a 512 gigabyte SSD as a boot drive that came from an old laptop. Reusing older parts to save on price is a really good thing to do, especially like we were just talking about editing PCs and how they require, better storage. For esports, Not generally. No, you don't really need that. After you're done loading into the game, there's not much for your storage to do, right? There's not much for that to do. So you're really not going to be struggling. As long as it's an SSD, you're fine. Generally, you're just absolutely fine. So I wouldn't worry about it unless storage space is a problem for you, but esports titles generally not going to be a big deal. All right, and you do have the Hyper 212 Pro air cooler. I'm not exactly sure how great that air cooler is. I haven't looked too much into that at all. Generally, you're not really going... So this is a general thing, right? Because I know the Thermalright Peerless Assassin, right, that CPU cooler, it's able to cool everything, and this one might be able to cool everything, right? As long as it's able to cool everything, it's fine. The only downside to sticking with air cooling, and a lot of people just stick with it for the longevity and the effectiveness and the cost. It is far more price efficient to go with air cooling, and that is 100% valid. The problem with it, though, is if you care a terrible amount about noise levels, AIOs are just simply able to keep things cooler and quieter. So it's able to keep it at like the same, level of temperature while also staying quieter because it's able to, more effectively get rid of that heat and give it to, a very wide surface where, fans can, push over the grill. It just ends up being a way quieter system. Way quieter. That was one of the big things I noticed switching to an AIO and getting my fan levels tuned to my liking is I'm able to keep my 9800 X3D cool and quiet. And that's really nice. That's the big nice thing with AIOs. But yeah, the RM850X 850 watt PSU, I wasn't seeing any complaints online. Everybody was saying it's pretty good, and I have no complaints about it. 850 watts, that's good. That's what I use in a 5080 9800 X3D build, and I'm perfectly fine with it. I even had a 1063 gigabyte in there as a PhysX GPU for a little bit, but I ended up taking that out, and it was working just fine in things. And so you have plenty of headroom, especially with the GPU that you're using, which we'll get to a little bit later. You want to get the 9800 X3D. Now, the reason you're doing this is for esports, because you're trying to get the highest possible frame rate from your CPU while trying to attempt to stay as GPU limited as possible. Or, not to stay GPU limited as possible, but try to gain as much ground, get as high as possible, and then lower your graphics settings all the way down so you just super sky high for the best competitive advantage, which is a very common thing, and I definitely understand that. And here's where it gets interesting, because you're pairing the 9800 X3D with a 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. I love that graphics card. I absolutely love it. And for esports titles where you're going to be turning all the settings down, you're going to be just fine. So here's the thing though. In some even competitive titles, you may still end up being GPU limited at low, at 1440p with the 9060 XT 16 gigabyte. I don't think that's terribly too likely, or that you'll see it in many situations, but you might not be able to get the most out of your CPU that way. But that's the thing with, that's generally how it goes when you're trying to eliminate a bottleneck. It's going to be bottlenecked somewhere in every game. If you're playing mostly Counter-Strike or Valorant, you will not be GPU limited. I believe in the finals, which is a game I play a lot of right now, you might end up being a little GPU limited with a 9800 X3D, even at native res. If you're using upscaling, you'll be fine, for sure. But generally, yeah, I'm not 100% positive. I actually want to try throwing my 9060 XT 16 gig into my system and with the 9800 X3D and playing some games like that to see what that looks like. That will probably be coming up in another video. So if this is still something you're interested in learning more about and you haven't already bought the parts, which this comment is a little old at this point. It's from our budget PC Still a Thing, which is, I believe, like 5-6 days old now, almost a week. If you haven't already bought those parts, look forward to that. I might be doing that in the next few days. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, reusing other parts, the case fans, a case and all that, perfect. Do it. Honestly, save all the cost you possibly can, especially with memory prices being as high as they are. Do what you need to. That's definitely something you want to do. And yeah, you don't need to get a crazy graphics card for esports titles. CPU is definitely more important, so this does end up being pretty good. And you say it comes to about $1,400 in the end. And you know what? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You're still getting a a 9800X3D. I think you could save more on the motherboard. Okay, so what I would recommend, just looking at the Hyper 212 Pro, this is the Cooler Master. Yeah, okay, so what I'm looking here, if it's not something you already own, probably do the Thermalright Peerless Assassin, because it's looking like this is going to end up being at least either a little bit more expensive or only a little bit. It's right around the same price as the Peerless Assassin, and honestly, Peerless Assassin is most likely the way to go. Yeah, okay. So if it's not something you've already bought or already owned from your previous PC, I'd probably recommend getting a Peerless Assassin. And so what that's going to look like, let's see. Calculator, pull that up. All right, so it does end up being about $1,400. You know what? That's okay. That's solid. Do what you need to do. You're getting a 9800 X3D. Your gaming performance is going to be sick. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be sick. Now, what is your refresh rate on your monitor? Okay, so that's important too. If you're just trying to go highest of the high, esports, go for it. This will work. This will do it. This will do it. This will do it fine. You know, I can't guarantee that it'll do it forever, judging from the GPU, but you will have plenty of headroom, especially if you're using upscalers. Oh, you'll be just fine filling that out in esports titles. Go for it. Maybe wait for Black Friday. It should be starting Thanksgiving week and shortly here. So you said you are in Pennsylvania, I believe. And if that's the case, oh my gosh, just wait. Yeah, wait. Just use what you got until then and see if there's any deals you can snag. I know Daniel Owen does a lot of deal hunting. So if you want to keep, tabs on what he finds, you can do that. There's other channels that do deal hunting too. I'm probably not going to be doing too much of that unless I find something crazy. Then I'll just post a post or something if that interests anybody. That's that question. Thank you for leaving that. Again, that was Alex Sanson YouTube YT 2623. I'm probably destroying that. I'm so sorry. All right. So quickly, we have a question from Vixen from my thank you video, where he asks, I have a 3060 Ti. I'm worried. Should I buy AMD next, or will NVIDIA give better path tracing performance? In Cyberpunk's 2077, I installed a bunch of mods, and it's insane what to do waiting for AMD to add Redstone denoiser. Okay, here's the thing. Next, what are you... So it depends on what you mean by next. You have a 3060 Ti. I hope it's the 12 gig, because mods will destroy your VRAM in Cyberpunk, especially if it's visual mods to any real degree. Here's the thing. Currently, if you're talking you want to buy into the current generation of either NVIDIA or AMD, NVIDIA is going to give you better path tracing performance, and that's just a fact. The interesting thing is my brother just switched from the 4070 Ti to a 9070 XT. So there's now a 9070 XT in the house that I'm currently residing within. So that's pretty sick. But here's the thing. In Path Trace Cyberpunk, it performs roughly identical to what we were seeing with the 4070 Ti. And so if you're buying into the current generation, the 5070 Ti is going to outperform the 9070 XT quite a bit. And at that point, if you're talking this generation, if you're targeting path tracing, you're probably going to want to do the NVIDIA cards. Probably, especially if you're trying to do visual mods with path tracing and all that. However, next generation, who knows? I think there's been a lot of rumors that they're going to be trying to really push into path tracing and all that. And if that's the case, it could be very competitive and very reasonable to do that. So it really depends. Are you trying to buy now, or are you trying to buy later? So yeah, it's kind of up to your discretion whether or not you want to do that. And I hope I answered your question relatively well. Generally, it really depends on whether you're buying now or later. If you're buying later, wait and see if AMD is able to catch up on path tracing. If not, if you're trying to buy this generation, NVIDIA is probably what you want at this point. Although some people might disagree with me. Some people just think path tracing is a total waste of life. I don't agree. It's a personal opinion, though. It's just an opinion-based thing, whether or not you think it's worth the visual upgrade. Personally, I think it's worth it. I like it. I love path tracing. But I'm also a snob. I'm a loser. So, thank you for the question. That's awesome. Thank you for leaving that and supporting the channel. I love it, man. And I hope I hope I answered at a reason enough time. I know it's 11 days ago, so I'm sorry for taking so long. And here is another very interesting question from the most recent video, actually, from Dr. ZHD from my video, OLED monitors, are they worth twice the price? He's trying to decide if he should upgrade from a 7800 XT to 9070 XT, or if he should upgrade from 144 Hz 1440p IPS to an OLED instead. Now, this is a fascinating question because it's very nuanced. The 7800 XT will be losing to the 9070 XT in everything when it comes to performance. It just will. It's noticeably slower. It just is. It will be faster than the 9060 XT, so it's still a very solid GPU. It will do everything you want it to do pretty much, unless you're trying to target high level path tracing. In my opinion, now that I've bought an OLED screen and I'm seeing it in front of me currently right now, what I would say, if you're sticking with 1440p, a 9070 XT will cost you more than to get a 1440p 240 Hz OLED screen, and I think you will notice unless you're trying to go for max settings in the most recent titles, which even then, I think you will probably be noticing a higher increase in visual fidelity and quality by switching to an OLED panel over switching to the 9070 XT. Now, this really depends on the games you're playing and what you're targeting in those games, what settings you want to play at. But at the same time, I'm not sure if those settings, especially if you're trying to stick with AMD, like it's not like you're going to be enabling path tracing. I mean, I probably would. I don't know. It just takes so much of the, performance of the 9070 XT to turn on path tracing that it just, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's worth it at that point for AMD. And so it's not like you're going to see a huge visual increase unless it's something you're willing to do. And even at that point, I honestly think that the deep blacks, the black blacks, the rich colors, and all that you get from OLED is just more impressive than what you would receive from upgrading, it's a relatively small upgrade to go from a 7800 XT to a 9070 XT in the grand scheme of things. I know I'm not really one to talk because I make minimal upgrades all the time in the grand scheme of things. I've almost, like every generation had a new card for the past, several years, almost 10 years now. So I'm not really one to talk. However, OLED is it's so good. It is so good. And if you want to see a more of a pro and con type discussion on OLED, everybody else out there, he actually commented on this video. So he had a little bit more of that when he commented. But if you want to see that, everybody else, I will leave the video in the description for you to check out. But yeah, thank you for leaving that question. I hope I could answer. That's definitely my opinion. And you can also remember, if it interests you, if you're getting a high refresh rate OLED panel, like a higher refresh rate, because right now you're on 144 Hertz. If you're moving on to 240 Hertz, again, there's a panel that I'm using right now that's $450 right now, at least where I live. I'm not sure exactly where you live. It really depends on what the prices are. Honestly, again, always whenever we're talking about these type of discussions, whenever we're having these type of discussions, I live in America on the East Coast, and the prices here will look different from prices in other regions, and it just will. And so take everything I say in the context in which I say it, which could be very different from where you live. But if you're going to be switching, remember that the AMD 6000 and above, I believe, all have access to AMD fluid motion frames inside the driver. So you can remember to use that to fill out that space if that's something you're interested in, especially if the game doesn't have native FSR frame gen support. I actually think there's some people saying that it causes less input lag than the built-in frame gen for FSR 3. So there's that. So yeah, keep that in mind. It's pretty cool. My brother's been using it a bit, so he's been giving it very positive remarks. So there's that. Keep that in mind. Use that to fill out that space a little bit more if you do end up switching to 240 hertz. But yeah, I've been recording for a little while now, and I think I'm going to have to cut it there. Again, thank you for leaving all your comments. It's really wonderful to see all of the support, all of the community engagement. You'll love to see it. And I'm really enjoying putting out all these videos for you guys. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be totally keeping up to 3 videos a week. It really depends on what my schedule looks like, but I will be putting out videos, and I hope that they can be as high a quality as they have been moving forward, and even better in the coming, weeks, months, and beyond. So there's that. Thank you again, and leave any questions you have, any comments you have, any suggestions, anything you have in the comment section below. We'll read over that and maybe respond to that in the next one of these videos. I'm also planning on doing response videos if that interests anybody. This is a kind of a Q&A type video here in which you ask questions, I answer. But in the response videos, I'll be remarking on some of y'all's opinions and experiences. So if you want to share some of your opinions and experiences, talk a little bit about what I said, or share some things you think to be true, go ahead. And I'll see you in a response video or the like. It's been a ton of fun lately. Again, kind of nerve-wracking, getting into the swing of things, but it'll be fun. It'll be fun. And yeah, expect to keep seeing, my standard, content reviewing certain tech topics, if that interests you a lot more. There was a question here about DLDSR, and I thought about answering it in this video, but I decided that I'm actually going to do a video on its own discussing that, because I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I have some opinions on DLDSR, but I think I'm going to try to use it a little bit more to really get a feel for it and what I really think about it before I answer that question, and maybe make that its own video. And yeah, there's some other questions that I'll be getting to later, and it's just great to see. And thank you so much for leaving them and sharing. And if you enjoy this type of content, you want to see it grow, consider subscribing and like the video if it was something you really enjoyed. And yeah, thank you again for your support, and thank you for tuning in, and I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.